All our guests are present. Let me take this opportunity to welcome everyone for joining us in this dialogue. Those present in the room here, but also those who are joining us online. This is a part of a series of engagements that we're organizing as the Wits School of Governance. The idea really is to create a platform for a dialogue between the leaders of the various political parties and the citizens of our country. The dialogues are facilitated by moderators. In this case, two of them, I'll introduce them shortly, who are our youngest academics in the school. And I'm really pleased to welcome Rekhatso Fatse and Tandiwe, who will be facilitating here. Let me introduce myself. The name is Temba Masako. I'm the acting head of the Wits School of Governance. The Wits School of Governance sees itself as the leading school of governance in the continent. Our primary objective is to produce a new generation of public policy makers, but also administrators. That is a generation of people whose mission in life is to serve the people of South Africa and not end up with public servants and public leaders who are in the public space for self-interest. So it is our hope that, in fact, through our programs, both academic and executive education programs, we will be able to make a contribution of producing a new generation of leaders. 2024, as you all know, is the year of general elections in the country. But what we want to remind all of us sitting here in the room is that this is proving to be a seminal year as far as general elections are concerned, because there are more than 50 countries around the world that will be holding general elections. This includes more than 20 countries in the African continent and the rest of the globe. The one example I want to mention is that of India, that is already having its general elections with 670 million registered voters. And that election is taking place over, I'm told, about 6 or 8 days. So if we think our election is a big election, think of it in that perspective. So we think it's important for us to have conversations as citizens of the country, the continent, and the world about what do these general elections mean for democracies in individual countries, for the different regions in the world, and the rest of the globe, as the world is going through many challenges of rising levels of poverty, unemployment, inequality, global warming, but also regional conflicts that we're seeing in different regions around the world. So we thought it would be an opportunity for you to listen to the leaders of the various political parties, but I must also remember to mention the independent candidates who will be participating in these elections for the first time. So we want you to hear it directly through their own voices. The program started with a session with the IEC, where the IEC was communicating to our series here, but also to the rest of the world about their readiness to conduct the forthcoming general elections. That session was followed with a session with political parties represented in Parliament, especially the three large political parties, but we don't like to use the word small or large. So we invited the DA, EFF, and the governing party. Fortunately, we were able to get the EFF to participate and the DA with the governing party promising to send us the president in the next few days or so. That session is then followed by today's session, where we also gave an opportunity this morning to the other political parties represented in Parliament, but we thought it would not be sufficient to talk to leaders of parties that are already in Parliament. We needed to also give a voice to those new political parties. I want to use the phrase, the new kids in the block, if they allow me to say so. These are political parties newly established, operating outside of Parliament, and hopefully they will get votes to be in Parliament, but also the independent candidates. Without any waste of time, let me introduce our speakers for today. I must tell you, they sent me long bios, and I will end up taking more time reading their bios instead of giving you the opportunity to listen to them. So the first one on my list, not in any order of priority, is Ms. Anele Mda, who is an independent candidate who is contesting elections to be in the National Assembly. The next speaker, and let's give an applause, ladies and gentlemen. The next leader representing the Build One South Africa BOSA party, her name is Ms. Nobuntu Hlazo Webster, who is also the deputy leader of the party. Welcome. The next on my list is Ms. Vuyiswa Ramokgopa, who's the Gauteng Premier candidate for Rise Mzansi. Not least is Lungelo Zulu, who's representing Action SA. And I must say, they heard about this event. We've been trying to get them. And when they heard that it was taking place, they said they are coming. So Lungelo, you're welcome, and thanks for joining us here. Let's welcome. And the moderators for the session on my right is Tandiwe, who's going to be moderating. He's one of my academics in the school. He'll be joined by Rekotsofatse Chikane, who will be moderating the session. So basically what's going to be happening is the two moderators will kick off with the first set of questions. As soon as the parties have completed their response, we'll then give an opportunity to you in the room to ask one or two questions, and then we'll go to the audience that's online. So without any much ado, I hand over to Tandiwe and Rekotsofatse. The chair is yours. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. So I hope I'm audible and this mic is on, unless I must switch it on myself.
Yeah.
There we go. Sorry, they told me it was going to switch on automatically, and I don't know where. There we go. Cool, perfect. So welcome to the Wits School of Governance. We're very, very excited to have this session. As our admirable head of school has said, that we really thought it would be really important to get organizations and parties that are really trying to get into parliament, right? Get into the legislature, really try and diversify the amount of voices and opinions. We thought that it would be important as a school of governance to get them into the room as well. To pose them questions about what are their ideals, what are their policies, and as a school of governance in particular, we'll also be asking policy questions, right? So we won't just make it as an opportunity to electioneer and campaign. A lot of our students are here, both masters and PhD students, and a lot of them study this art of public policy making, the politics of policy making. So a lot of our questions will be dealing on those themes. Me and my co-facilitator will ask a round of questions and then open it up to everyone else. And I think I can start. So this question is to all the parties. It's not policy specific just as yet, but all of you, including one of our independent candidates, are all contesting to come into parliament. We fully understand that the likelihood, unless something very dramatic happens, the likelihood of beating the ANC is very, very low, right? So the question then becomes, what's really happening is that newer parties are campaigning to replace the established parties in parliament, right? And we've seen established opposition parties kind of go about their business. They become very, very comfortable. So the question then becomes, what makes you different from the established opposition? And the type of work that you would do in parliament as an opposition party, right, that would really inspire that there's something different happening, right? If you can give us suggestions about what you guys are thinking, policy proposals that you would be putting forward, but what makes you different from the current opposition organizations? And let's start with Ndati Zulu, if you don't mind going first.
Geez, it's a howler there. Firstly, I think from an Action SA perspective, what distinguishes from us is our track record in governance. Right from our founder, right to our leaders within the local government space. We do have a couple of representatives, elected representatives in government, in Tshwane, in Ekurhuleni, in the city of Johannesburg, where we've had a bit of experience governing. So we have stayed true to some of the commitments that we've made. We've put forward some enterprising proposals. We've also put forward some basic proposals like insourcing of workers, just to bring some dignity back into your general workers, your security guards, your cleaners, and staff. So, yeah, in the main, we think that also some of our leaders, from Dr. Herman to our premier candidates, Mr. Ngobeni, they've had some great amount of experience where governance is concerned. They've had a taste of what it is like to be in government from, the mayoral chain with Mr. Mashava, and also as an MMC for Mr. Ngobeni, and as councillors, with the nitty-gritties of daily basic service delivery oriented type of work. So we think that, from all of those, when we put all of them together and we look at ourselves, we think, okay, we've sort of come forward with a basic, ethical and sort of, clean governance type of approach to things. None of our public reps, when they were in government, have been accused of corruption or even remotely, found guilty to have been part of the pillaging of state resources, as is the case whenever people come into governance. So that value proposition, we think that we can take some of that and together with our policy proposals that we have put in place, to find some mass appeal with people who are also dissatisfied with the status quo. But also to answer that question around what type of approach should we not be in government are we going to be taking? You have to be an active opposition. You have to be a pragmatic and realistic opposition as well. You can't shoot for things that very much are not going to be achievable. But one of the basic proposals we want to put forward, should we be, when we are in Parliament, and should we be in Parliament, is we want to introduce an amendment to the Constitution. We want to establish a Chapter 9 institution that deals specifically with corruption. We think that Chapter 9 institution needs to be independent of the executive. We think that it has to be empowered, report to Parliament. Its budget and its personnel and recruitment and resources have to be allocated by Parliament. I can't think of a scenario where an executive is in charge of an anti-corruption body that is going to be tasked or mandated with investigating matters of corruption, independent of the executive and absolutely unfettered powers, wide-reaching powers to go out there and do their work. So we want to introduce a private member's bill that's going to speak to that. Our Team Fix South Africa member for Justice and Correctional Services, Advocate Julie Seaton, is currently working around that as well.
Okay.
So that it's one of the first priorities we want to achieve once we are in Parliament. So to canvass other opposition members and also canvass some people that might be in government. We don't know if that's going to be the ANC or it might be the multi-party charter. We may never know. But to canvass all of those members of Parliament around there as well and see how they can come up and support some of our initiatives around that.
So if we can go to RISE now, because you've heard the responses, Action SA has had the experience already. How would you approach the same situation?
Thank you. I hope everybody can hear me, and good afternoon to you all. My name is Vuyiswa Ramokgopa, Gauteng Premier Candidate for Rise Mzansi. I actually want to come back to your initial question, Dr. Chikani. Forgive me for my formality, but we are in your domain, so I'll need to respect you accordingly. So, Dr. Chikani, I think we need to actually frame the question differently. Because in your framing, there is an inherent assumption that there's an ANC and everything else is in opposition to the ANC. Rise Mzansi fundamentally rejects that concept. We have, from the onset, said publicly that we are not existing to be an opposition to the ANC. We are existing to present the electorate with a credible alternative to the ANC. So that's point one. And I think number two, and I'll get into why that's important. Number two is that our democracy is maturing, which is a beautiful thing. We are actually now coming of age as a democracy. So multi-party democracy is going to be the order of the day going forward. This idea that there is going to be this single majoritarian rule of one party that everybody else has to beat is something that we actually need to move on from. And I think this election gives us a first foot through the door of really thinking about what does a true multi-party democracy look like in South Africa, where we have to negotiate around policy, where we have to compromise, where leaders have to be able to work across the table with others who they may not necessarily share the same views with. And I think that is, for me, the opportunity in the coming election. And so where does Rise Mzansi then come into play, and how do we differentiate ourselves? I think the primary point of difference is that we are not a breakaway of any political party. Our national leader, the majority of our leaders in our National Leadership Collective, do not come from other political parties where they found themselves disgruntled and then went to go start something. And I'm not saying that to slight anyone. I'm saying it because it's important in talking about being able to reimagine a new political culture. Rise Mzansi is a venture of people who came together and said, we are not just unhappy with one party, we are unhappy with the whole thing. We're unhappy with the oppositions, we're unhappy with the current party, we're unhappy with the culture of politics in South Africa. And so as people who come from different walks of life, how do we then build a better, more enduring, more dynamic political culture that is more participatory, that enables people from all walks of life to participate? And we have the room to do that because we don't arrive with an established, let me say, culture of politics from another place. And I think it's important. It's important because as we reimagine the next 30 years, we need to be able to do that freely without always being in a space of comparing ourselves to what is or what has existed, or thinking of ourselves as an opposition. So we are indeed at the start line, but it is not our intention to spend our lives opposing the ANC. It is our intention to craft a vision for our country that is compelling, that is inclusive, and that a large number, if not a majority of South Africans can find resonance with and can get behind.
Thank you so much. Ms. Linda?
Thank you, Prof. Chikane, and good afternoon.
You'll get me in trouble with my colleagues.
Oh, sorry.
I'm claiming positions.
Sorry for that. Good evening to everyone and to my fellow panelists, as well as people who are watching this online. I do want to start by saying that any presupposition that seeks to suggest that this country is an inheritance of a certain political party, it has got no basis. Whether that political party is an ANC that is now a governing party, or it's an aspirant political party that is still at the ranks of finding itself inside, it does not have a basis, and we shouldn't even have it fathomable in our mindset that South Africa can be surrendered to as an investment that belongs only to a political party that must exploit it and fully begin to experiment with it, because there's far greater a cost to be endured by many of us if such was to come into a reality. But I also do want to take the question that is being asked here to say, I am a product of politics, and the good thing about me is that I'm not just a product of politics because I was recruited by people who saw me having to be aligned with a political party. I was born in politics. And I will say it unashamedly, I was born in the politics of the ANC. Because fundamentally, the politics of the ANC were always about the characterization of the true struggle of the people. And it was a politics that was built on the true espousal values and principles that were to center the people's issues at the core. And fundamentally, there can never be something that I would find wrong with that. And I aligned with that because, not that because my family has been a family of politicians and activists and whatnot, but because I resonated with the struggle that the ANC espoused at the time. But going forward to the 30 years that we are now sitting at, and we must reflect on that 30 years, I do want to say, I have been brought into the space as an independent candidate out of not just the dereliction of duty at the hands of the ANC, but also at the fact that we seem to believe that as citizens, our role and responsibility in this country only ends when we go to the ballot and there's nothing that comes with it. And I think the arrogance that has characterized the body politics of South Africa is on the basis that as citizens we've accepted the complacent peripheral space that we have been pushed to by party political hegemony that has been at the helm of our country. So much so that even when you hear people speaking about us as independent candidates, it's like we are stepchildren that we have been done favor for by some political parties. I stand here authoritatively as a South African, because this is a culmination of the true expression of the democracy that was fought for. I'm not sitting here because someone else saw me cute or loved me. I stand here and sit here as a leader in my own country who have got a role to play and whose role has been well expressed in the Constitution of South Africa. And I want to say, in answering your question, going to Parliament, and I'm not even leaving that union buildings at a bay. I'm even looking at that union building to step in and become the president of this country. And I'm not saying that as a joke. I'm saying it because I know what I'm capable of doing. When I say I'm a leader of integrity, when I say I'm an honest leader, when I say I'm a leader of transparency and a people-focused person, I mean it, because my work as an activist speaks for itself. It's high time that I believe someone or a group of people of South Africa occupy spaces in public office to serve the people of South Africa, not along party lines where allegiance will first have to fall on the loyalists of the party, but directly to the people of South Africa. Currently, that is not what is happening. And I don't think it's going to happen for as long as we leave things to the party political hegemony that has been in charge.
No, thank you so much for that. And Nobuntu, would you mind coming in as well?
Yes, sure. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for having us this afternoon and for the opportunity to have this conversation. I really like your question because, you know, sometimes people look at us and think, I don't know, we were bored. We had nothing better to do. And so we thought, yeah, let's start a political party. I first want to say that starting a political party is one of the most difficult things you can do. And it's something that we set out to do because there was a gap. There was a glaring gap in the political landscape in South Africa. And there's a number of reasons that was the gap, but I want to focus on one in answering your question. One of the things that we have and have had in the political landscape in this country are political parties that exist for the furtherance of political party objectives and agendas. You know, when the electoral conference of the ANC happened, we all sat at the edge of our seats, worried about who would become president, having no control or power over that, knowing that whoever becomes president of this party ultimately is likely to become our president. And that means that power has then been removed from the hands of South Africans to directly be able to influence who leads them. That also then will pertain to policy. It will also then will pertain to governance in and of itself. So when we started Build One South Africa, it was really to say, let's put power back in the hands of South Africans and of people. And we looked around and there wasn't anything like that that existed. So how we are different and how we've differentiated ourselves is that, first of all, when we launched in September 2022, we asked South Africans to choose their own candidates. We said, South Africans, nominate candidates, nominate business leaders, nominate academics, nominate community leaders, nominate leaders in your community who have served your community, who are credible, who you want to see leading in South Africa. And we've done that. We pioneered a model that really hasn't existed. We have 130 candidates, and these are candidates that we can say have really been chosen by the community. They come from the community. So that's the first. The second is that we then went and and worked with other political parties. We formed what we call the Bosa Alliance, and we have political parties that we work with in different provinces. And those are political parties that are newer, some of them are older, but they have representation in the local municipalities, but they truly represent communities and the realities that those communities face. And then lastly, through our own policies, and I know we'll unpack policy a little bit more now, but you look at our education policy, you look at our safety policy, you look at our economic policy. When you look at all the policies we have, even our housing policy, I was at a housing debate earlier today, they are about putting power back into the hands of people as well. It's to say, for example, when we speak about education, how do you make sure that whatever is fiscally allocated for education, in that budget, how do you make sure that whatever is allocated to an individual learner, a parent has the right to be able to choose how that is spent in which school that their child goes to. And that's putting power back in the hands of a parent and of people. Our economic policy, I'm sure we'll unpack a bit later, does the same. And so ultimately, the differentiator is saying, how do we as South Africans participate in our democracy by having power back in our hands, not only electorally, but also even through policy.
Thank you so much. And I'll let Ms. Matthews take over now.
Thank you so much, Ruhutsu, and welcome to our panelists. So my question speaks more to regional and global politics, and also to intergenerational leadership. I'd like to know your views on, and we'll start with you, Nobuntu. The African continent is the most youthful in the world, with at least 2/3 of our population under the age of 30. Yet our leadership remains on the older side, but they do have a wealth of global experience. How do you aim to navigate an increasingly complex, multipolar world and ensure that the interests of African people, and particularly the youth, are sustained?
So maybe let me start on the issue of youth. We have to make sure that, and I'll speak about youth and women, because that's, I mean, you have a voter base of more than 55% that is women, even in this country, and yet you don't see that representation. Like you say, we have a high youth population and you don't see the representation of youth. And what you have to make sure of is that in political structures of political parties, you know, we've done so in our party, you have to be intentional about making sure that you have that representation as a start. The second, as you speak to Africa and this multipolar world that we now are in, is that we have to make sure that we put ourselves first. In whatever engagements, negotiations that we're having, as it pertains to international relations, foreign policy, we have to make sure that as South Africa, we put ourselves first. We put ourselves first economically. We put ourselves first in ensuring that, particularly when you speak to the issue of youth, with a younger population, what are the kinds of relations that will benefit the young people of our country and of our continent? The second, though, is to prioritize relations on the continent. You know, when you look at trade amongst the European countries, it's around 60%. Ours sits at around 15%. And that takes political will. You have the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement, but you haven't really seen that implemented. And the reason for that is because you don't always have the political will. In order to have the political will, you do need to change the leadership that we have, that even in our own country, even in other African countries, you look now at what is happening in Zimbabwe and at where the South African leadership, the president, and the government as a whole, how they have responded or not responded to that. You look at what was happening in Uganda, where you had a young person who was contesting and wanting to change the country, wanting to take the country out of the hands of a dictator. You look at what happened to Bobi Wine, and you look at the response or non-response of South Africa, and you realize that the issue is in our leadership, and we have to change that leadership with younger leadership, like the likes of Bobby Wine, Nelson Chamisa in Zimbabwe, and the younger leadership that we have now. As Broadbanners say, we have younger leadership. Our party leader's in his early 40s. I'm in my early 40s. Generally, the leadership is younger than what you would normally have. And we have to have more of those younger parties that are representative of younger people starting to surface and starting to progress the agenda of this generation, and not the selfish, often, and dictatorial agenda that we've seen on the continent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tandiwe. For me, I think the most important thing is that generally in the African continent, there is a loud call for a reawakening of our African leadership that is embedded on realizing what the essence of structures and organizations like AU were formed to achieve. And I think we do need to reimagine the basis and the purpose of such organizations, because I believe that if we can be able to locate our strategic role and responsibility that ought to be played at that level, we would then be able to look at ourselves individually as the countries in the continent and be able to identify strategic partners that align with each other on the basis of ideological pursuit that we want as a country. But also over and above that, I think generally we cannot run away from the fact that in the continent, we still suffer from the ageism kind of leadership that is hogging offices. And this emanates and emerges from the struggle credentials that the leadership that have gone into the struggle liberation cause believes that they have not yet satisfied themselves in fully serving themselves by being in these public offices of strategic authority and power. As a result, they fail to understand that at the core of their greed to occupy and cling and hog offices, it is a strategic regressing of the whole entire purpose of what the struggle was about in the first place. And I think one of the things that I would advocate for is that the participation of South Africa in regional stratas and all global structures that we participate on, it must really begin to be a real alignment of everything that informs where South Africa wants to take itself. Because we cannot be in marriages of convenience that is less about us, but more about things that are of destruction to the cause that we are in pursuit of. And I want to add by saying that looking at the inspiring awakening that is happening in countries like Senegal. I mean, the newly inaugurated president of Senegal. These are not things that we are supposed to be seeing in Africa and still being excited about, because it's a once occurrence that is happening in a blue moon. It must be something that we must begin to have these veterans, as much as we cherish the wealth of information and wisdom that they carry, we must be able to say at some point, the reign of new leaders that must emerge has come, and we must appreciate and love them, but they must park by the wayside and allow the vibrant, energetic generation of visionary leaders to emerge, and emerge whilst they are still there, when they can still offer wisdom, they can still offer counsel, they can still guide and lead without necessarily being the ones who practically occupy office. But this consistent, hegemony of tight grip in leadership positions, as though once a person is out of office, they are not going to be recognized as a leader, it simply shoots the very basis that we're supposed to celebrate their leadership for.
Thank you. Real.
Thank you. Okay. So, and I hope I still remember your question in full, but I'll try.
Do you want me to repeat it?
No, it's okay. I'll try. So, I think as an overarching comment, the African continent has been failed dismally by poor, weak, uninspired leaders. We often talk about the fact that we have an abundance of young people, we have creative talent, we have minerals, we have innovators, creators, we have every possible ability to effect our aspirations for this continent. but it is the leaders at the helm of many of the countries at this continent that fail us and fail its people dismally. And on the same trajectory of sort of being a bearer of bad news, while I would love, and I love the idea of an increased amount of young leaders, but we must not behave like youth in and of itself is the panacea to the failed governance and the challenges experienced in Africa. It is not. We have seen young leaders in our very own country who have come into office on the ticket on the back of youth and have been absorbed into a system or have participated in a system that continues to fail the people of this country. So I think where we need to take the conversation now is really about saying, what is the type of leadership that is required across the board to be able to harness the inherent natural and human, financial, social, intellectual capital that we have in our continent and really position the continent globally in the way that we would all like to see it. And if I then just come back to South Africa, I mean, the African Free Trade Agreement, in theory, we have this agreement in place, which should be opening up markets for us on the continent, which should be enabling even us as South Africa to be able to reach the billion people on this continent and actually should be helping us grow our economy. And I think we are, of course, strong players in the region, in SADC, but we need to go to the next step and actually be operationalizing the AFCTA. Sorry. It's a messy acronym, that one. So it needs to be operationalized. And it needs people around the table who can apply their minds to how do we take it to the next level, beyond just a policy, beyond just a well-thought-out concept. How do we operationalize it, and how do we ensure that it genuinely translates into, into trade opportunities, into growth, into multilateral, actually, trade, not just South Africa to the continent, but also the continent to here. We are not able right now to necessarily walk in a grocery store and pick up, goods from the continent. Why is that? And the other way around, I think maybe you'll find more South African products in other parts of the country, but these are the more, let me say, technical conversations that we now need to be having, and we need to be able to converge a collective of leaders that are willing to do that. And we've seen the successes of that type of leadership on the continent. So we see countries like Zambia, under the leadership of HH. We see countries that, even Kenya, even countries like Rwanda, obviously, that everyone likes to talk about. But the point is, it is about ensuring an absolute commitment to competent leaders who are able to execute on all of these aspirations that we have. And of course, we hope and would like that many of them should be young people, because it's not just about the age, but it's really about being able to bring newness of thinking. It's about being able to think and be adaptable around across a number of different industries, around a number of different experiences, and be able to harness that intergenerational knowledge. And I think as a country and as a continent, we do ourselves a grave disservice by not actually ensuring that we have young voices and young leaders at the table, driving policy, executing policy, and sitting at the tables where actual technical solutions are being thought out. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's also about, the various sectors that get to benefit. So from an Action SA perspective, how would you tackle the issue of intergenerational transformation in the context of a very contentious global political world order at the moment?
There you go.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Taniwe. I think as a start, also, I think I'm in agreement with something that Usisi Vuyiswa said here, that youth in and of itself is not a panacea to all of the challenges that we're experiencing from a leadership perspective. But also, just to throw something into the works a bit, we are also the least participating age group when it comes to matters of electoral politics. From the 18 to 24-year-old age group, we don't participate much. I don't count myself as 18 to 24, but just to mention that. And that for me tells me that if you don't occupy those types of spaces, if you don't go out there and agitate for change, then the people that you have neglect or your inaction to go and participate in all of these things are going to elect the type of people who are going to determine what your future is going to look like. I mean, if you look at the AU's, is it 2060 agenda, I think, that thing was conceptualized by Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma as AU Commission Chair 10 years ago. She's in her late 70s now, and there's absolutely no way we are going to achieve any of the targets and stuff that has been set in 2060 on what the continent is supposed to look like in relation to what the youth, is experiencing on the ground, and whether are we finding expression in some of those things. So for me, I think the first part of this is we have to take up all of these spaces. We have to ensure that the people that we are electing are people of sound mind, people that are capable, We don't want to be electing people who are in latter years of their political careers, or because they want to use those as stepping stones towards other things, for their personal achievement. But yeah, we also have a problem of succession in this country, from a political perspective. You never see leaders grooming the next crop of young leaders to take over, and this also applies in general to the African continent. That's why you'll see, sporadic violence erupting in Swaziland. You'll see it in Mozambique with certain sects of their society there now, with extremism and things like that, and in Zimbabwe as well. We are very much alive to that. In Zambia, in Kenya, in Nigeria, you name it. So each and every single political party, whether in South Africa or abroad, we have this problem. We don't seem to be thinking, how are we going to take this country forward when we are no longer here? And who are the people who should be tasked with that mandate to take the country forward? In this country, I think also, our presidents, they are always somewhere in their 60s and 70s and, somewhere heading towards their 80s. They should be in retirement. Why aren't they in retirement? Why aren't we getting just a little bit more in tune and more modern, person or people in spaces of leadership that will be able to provide that gap, intergenerational gap between the much younger population, that population and the older generation as well, in terms of plugging all of these gaps. But I think we need to take ourselves seriously as a country first, and also as a continent, and shape the type of multilateral institutions that get to decide all of these things for us. Things are not going to be, this is maybe a call for the youth that are also here and in general, is that the things are not going to be given to us. So nobody's going to come, there's no knight in, shining armor on a horse wielding a sword, coming to save or, uplift the youth in general and stuff. So we have to be the ones who are agitating for that to happen. We need to demand, space for us to be able to participate in there. And so Africa in general has to take itself seriously, reform these multilateral institutions, your AU commissions, your SADC as well, your ECOWAS and stuff. Have a look at what is it that we can find expression in what they are doing. What is our national interest? Where do we find expression as young people in our national interest? Does that find expression in the regional interests as SADC? Does that find expression overall in the African continent's interests as well? And then seek to agitate where we should, or what we think the direction of our continent should be from there. Then the world will also start taking us seriously from there, because some of the reasons why they don't take us seriously, we don't take ourselves seriously. So, But also just to mention, sorry to close off, Action SA has got 3 premier candidates who are women, who are not so young, if I can say, but a little bit on the younger side in comparison. But we have 2 caucus leaders in Ekurhuleni under the age of 35, and in Johannesburg under the age of 35. Deputy Mayor in Tshwane is 35. The caucus leader in Johannesburg is 33, turning 34. So that speaks to our aim or intention as a political party to say, where are we in terms of how are we uplifting women within our structures as well? Do they find expression in our leadership structures? Are they youth as well? And yeah, opening up spaces for them to be able to participate.
Cool. So thanks so much. So I think what I'll do now is ask two of the candidates a kind of policy-specific question, and then you can ask the other two. So I'll go with Nobuntu first. So earlier on, you were talking about essentially this 15,000 Rand voucher, right? This idea that you give a family, the head of a family, 15,000 Rand, so you open up their choices about what schools their child can go to. Now, 15,000 Rand is a lot of money. So the first aspect is, how do we fund this? Is it from the existing budget? Are we zero budgeting? Are we taxing people more, right? And then the next thing is, what's the means test for this? So who qualifies for the 15,000 Rand? Is it any family? For those who don't know, you take it and you can choose if your child goes to a school worth 15,000 Rand or you use your own income to top up the 15,000 Rand. But it's a nice subsidy. But the question then becomes, what if people send all their kids outside of the local area because the schools there are bad? And you further enhance that these schools never get the recapitalization that you would want. So just if you could break that down for us. And then for Action SA, you have a policy around this opportunities fund, which I find fascinating. And the basic logic of it is you remove, and you'll correct me if I get it wrong, you remove BEE compliance for companies because you say that it costs companies 4 to 6%. And instead of making them pay for the costs of BEE compliance, you tax them 5%. You put that money into a fund, and then you say we're going to fund businesses through that mechanism. What happens to the companies that don't want to transform in that situation? Do we leave them be because they're paying their we don't want to transform tax, right? And then how do you manage this opportunities fund? Who gets to apply for it? Is it every company? Is it particular companies of people of color? Just the machinations of that. If you start that side for both.
Sure, let me start on the education one. So this model is based on the current allocation. The base of the model is based on the current allocation per child in the education system now. So that's the basis of it, if that helps. But I want to speak to this idea of then the potential of people not choosing the local school and all going to another school. The policy in and of itself doesn't end at the issue of having this allocation be given to parents for them to choose their own school. It's also broader than that. It speaks to school infrastructure. It speaks to making sure that you improve the resourcing of all schools because as it stands now, you have instances, depending on what quintile the school falls into, that are less resourced than others. So it's making sure that schools are well-resourced as a start. It's secondly making sure that teachers are well compensated and that teachers are well incentivized for their performance, for how skilled they are in the system as well. And then thirdly, we speak of an education ombudsman that's making sure that at each and every school, there is an assessment of how that school is performing. There is an opportunity or there is a format within which parents, communities can report schools that are not performing and can report some of the abuses that happen in schools, whether it's abuses of resources, whether it's abuses of school time, whether it is just the non-performance of a school. That can be reported. And those are the kinds of things that have to be in place to make sure that all schools are performing as a start. But the other side of this as well is that what it then does to a school is that schools then start to compete amongst each other. Because they've got to make sure that in order to exist, in order to still have children that are coming to their school, they've got to perform. They've got to be a school where people want to come. Otherwise, that leads to the non-existence of the school. At this point in time, schools are just guaranteed that the kids in the area know they're stuck here, regardless of how they perform, regardless of what they do with the resources in the school, regardless of how the children perform. or the teachers themselves. They just know that there's an allocation of children that will come to our school, and we're guaranteed that. In this way, schools have to make sure that they perform in order to be able to attract learners to their school. The reality right now, and why this is a policy that we ultimately tabled, is that in this country right now, and this is why we talk about building one South Africa, where you land up and the quality of education that you get depends on where you've started. So if you're in a poor community, the likelihood is that you'll be in a poorer school, a poorer resource school, a school that has less performing teachers than another school. And that means that generation after generation, really, people are then stuck with the realities that they are born into. And that's something that we've got to solve for. The second is that you then are able to have specialized schools, you know, and you know that particularly when you get to high school, young people are able to choose schools that are aligned to their own aspirations, but also aligned to their own talents, their own skills, because now you're not stuck in the school in your neighborhood. Hey, there's a technical school that might be outside of your neighborhood, but you can go there. There's an entrepreneurship school that may be outside of your neighborhood, but you can go to that. And so you stop having this situation where you find that some learners are stuck in a system or in a school or education system that doesn't really cater to what they are good at. And actually, in some instances, this is why you find that you have such a high dropout rate, because you're simply in a school that doesn't cater to the kind of skills that you would need in order to be able to succeed in the marketplace.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. Mr. Zulu?
Yeah, thanks, Khotso, for that one. So I like I think you called it a transformation tax.
Lack of transformation tax.
Transformation tax. Yeah, I think it is on, thanks. So what we want is that we're sort of saying that the amount of money it costs a company to comply with legislation, you know, we've sort of played around the figures with that, and we've estimated that it's somewhere between 4 to 6% of company profits. So what we want to do is take those profits and introduce this opportunity fund levy for companies, and then we take that money into the fiscus, and then we allocate it to various initiatives that we have identified for targeting. So your question around who qualifies for it and stuff and all of that, it's everyone qualifies for it, but in essence, the aim will always be, or it'll always be, a bias towards economic justice as well, because we want to be able to retrace some of the problems of the past. So a bias will be towards, you know, black community, the Indian community, colored community, and stuff like that. So what we, in the main, I think in terms of not complying, I think the question was, and to say that companies who are resistant to that, I think mechanisms have to kick in terms of, you know, how do we then enforce some of these things, and introducing supplementary legislation to ensure that people are, or companies are complying with that proposal from our end. But yeah, it's more in line with that. But we have a very wonderful breakdown in terms of how we want to allocate some of these. And, you know, if you look at some of the SMMEs that are struggling when it comes to, you know, access to markets, access to credit, it's always the same, you know, racial groups. It's always the black community, it's always Indian community, it's always colored community. So naturally, you will have a bigger uptake in terms of when you are dispersing some of the proceeds from the Opportunity Fund to go towards entrepreneurs who are black, who are colored, and so forth. Yeah.
So if I push you slightly on that.
Yeah.
So government does that through different funds already, and it still hasn't moved the dial for SMMEs in particular. So whether it is the National Youth Development Agency, whether it is different subsidies that companies get, the question then becomes, what makes your fund different? Because you're still going to use the same state machinery. Because the flip side cost is these companies don't have to do this transformation initiative anymore. of the belief that there's a knock-on effect.
Yeah.
So how do we make this different?
How do we make this different? I think if you remove the political incentive of some of the people that are appointed to some of these things, your NYDAs, your NEFs, which, by the way, is not an empowerment fund. The NYDA is also not an empowerment fund for the youth. I mean, they can spend 100 million rands on a conference and then call it a World Youth Conference, and then all of a sudden it ticks boxes to say we have empowered the youth. That's not exactly how we are looking into that. We want to look into practicals, how many businesses in actual numbers, and look at the racial composition of some of the beneficiaries around there. And then you make an assessment to say, have we been successful in implementing some of these things? So we don't think that these are happening right now. So the beneficiaries of some of these programs are always the same people. It's always the people occupying your standard banks, boards, and people, this revolving board of directors that seems to be happening within the ruling party and some of their black capital elite partners. So we want to separate that, and which is why we are introducing some of these measures. And we're also wanting to do away with triple BEE, is informed in part by that, to say, how do we ensure that the system does not keep benefiting the same people over and over and over again? I'll make a very basic example. I myself used to be an aspiring entrepreneur at some point. I wanted to benefit with some of the legislation that I thought, or policy proposals that I thought, these are quite progressive and stuff, and how do I then participate in that regard? Some of the things that you are asked there are some of the darnest things. Are you a member of the African National Congress, and are you a donor of the African National Congress, or are you going to be a donor of the African National Congress and stuff? So we want to do away with all of these things. But in terms of how do we manage that, and who gets to run some of these programs like the Opportunity Fund, we want to make it a purely technocratic organization or institution, technocratically ran. So there shouldn't be any form of government interference in terms of who gets to run that institution, are they politically affiliated or politically exposed persons and stuff.
Perfect.
So we want to take away that power of appointment from us. We want to also put it forward towards Parliament to ensure that there's maximum transparency on who gets to run that, and some of the objectives and the broader mandates that we want them to achieve can be something that is transparent and open to the public.
No, thanks so much.
Thanks, Khotsu. My questions for Vuyo and Anele have to do mainly with gender transformative policy. So Visu, I'll start with you. So RISE has stated that they would implement a tax incentive for single mothers earning less than 500,000 Rand a year. I wanted to find out from you how you think this would sufficiently address structural inequalities that particularly Black women confront on a daily basis in our society. And how would it be different to the current social grant system? We've got one of the most expansive social grant systems on the continent, highly celebrated throughout the world, and yet it hasn't really made a dent in tackling inequality. In fact, we've become the most unequal country in the world, despite having a very expansive social grant system. So I wanted to just find out from you if you could distinguish between that and your approach. Thanks.
Thanks. Great question. So just as a point of clarification, the proposal around the tax rebate for single moms is not envisioned to deal with structural inequality as a whole. That is a much more multi-layered and complex topic, which I'm also happy to speak to. But I do want to zone in on that one a little bit to say, we have looked at the numbers. So as a starting point, 45% of households in South Africa are headed by single moms across the income spectrum, by the way. So single mothers head 45% of households. Just for reference, single fathers, 2% of households. Many households are also headed by child-headed households, and so on and so forth. So in looking at the social safety net that is available to this constituency, which are responsible not for 45% of households, but mind you, that goes up and down. So they're looking after their parents, they're also looking after their children. And there is a cohort of people that are effectively the missing middle, in that they are not at the lowest end of the income spectrum, whereby they qualify for the child grants and the 350, which is a non-grant. And they're also not at an income level where they're earning a living wage. Because a living wage in South Africa should at least be able to cover the cost of a food basket, which is 5,500 rand for a family of 4. And that is how we have settled on that as one of the many interventions that we want to bring forward to be able to alleviate the financial pressures on single mothers, who we know are essentially largely the people who are carrying the financial burdens of raising children and elderly people, etc. You will also know, of course, that we have a elderly people's grant, which kicks in only at 60 years old. So there's a whole cohort of people, and we addressed this issue when we picketed about the new policy which states that over 35s should be deprioritized for public sector work opportunities. In fact, they are not eligible for those work opportunities anymore. So all these EPWPs, Amapanyaza, and all these things, there's a whole chunk of people over 35 who get excluded from those work opportunities. And so what that means is that we are dealing, yes, with the youth unemployment issue, but effectively creating a whole other issue of people who are in the prime of their income earning years and their childbearing years, who are either unemployed or underpaid and have no social subsidy and have no mechanism that's currently available to them that subsidizes them. That's the reality. There's a missing middle of people that just do not get catered for. Now, on the topic of inequality broadly, and I'm gonna there's a whole lot of things, but I think I'll zone in on one. Our point of departure, and one of the key interventions that we have spoken about at length, is spatial inequality and spatial injustice, and the ways in which that reinforces structural inequality in our country, because structural is both physical but also systemic. So if you are a person who lives in, and I've experienced this, by the way, I used to live in Auckland Park. I tried to apply for a bond in Auckland Park. In fact, it was Bramfontein Werf. I tried to apply for a bond. I was rejected because I was told that the system shows that this area is unbondable because it's a slum, right? When I did eventually get approved, I was approved at a higher interest rate because it was deemed to be a high-risk lending. Now, what does that mean? That means me who lives in this area versus somebody who lives in an area that is deemed non-high risk. We now don't pay the same level of interest just on that basis alone. Before we even get into race issues, age issues, gender issues, your address has a bearing on whether you can access credit and the cost of credit, and whether you can participate meaningfully in the economy. It also has an impact on the education options that you have access to. It has an impact on the availability of cultural facilities, recreational facilities, and your ability to develop holistically as an individual beyond just having housing. And so our view is that we have to undo the original sin that led us to this particular issue that we have of rampant inequality, which is we need to redesign and redevelop our cities into inclusive cities. We need to have mixed income, multi-use type of development. And instead, what we've done is we've just entrenched those patterns of inequality by building houses far away from where people can access opportunities, and then making the cost of transport unbearable because people are spending 40% of their income on transport. So there are a number of different interventions that we've put forward. We talk extensively about our intentions around public transport, getting that cost, which is currently 80 Rand a day, to 20 Rand a day through the use of rail and bus transport. We talk a lot about access to credit and supplying low-cost capital to entrepreneurs and people who are starting businesses. And obviously looking at the practicalities of spatial transformation, which requires a multi-tiered approach, because again, development happens at multi-levels of government. Even myself, aspiring to be the Gauteng Premier candidate, I'm well aware that development approvals require local government, and housing budgets and policy happens at a national level. And so there needs to be a serious deepening of cooperative governance and leaders, and having leaders who are multidimensional and who can actually execute that which our Constitution aspired for us in coming up with those provisions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lastly, Anele, so you are an experienced politician. I'd like to know more about the daily taken for granted challenges for women in leadership and politics. And if you can explain to us the significance of launching your manifesto at the Concords Women's Jail in relation of the continuation of the past in the present. And just in the context of that, you know, GBV is a huge issue in our country. There have been many interventions in relation to tackling the scourge on women, and yet none of them have really succeeded. We're still very unsafe in our society. If you could respond in about 5 to 7 minutes, please, and then we can open up to the floor for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. First of all, in the first aspect of your question, I would love to maybe make this point that says there's always a question whenever women leadership rise in the society. This is not a South African issue. This is a societal issue across the globe. And this is despite the many lived experiences and occurrences where women have not stood up just to prove themselves that they are leaders, but they have stood for a cause that is genuine and a cause that would not be about themselves. In the context of South Africa, you would know that historically we do have the 1956 a momentous occasion, which did not just shape the discourse in as far as the leadership of women of the era, but it went on to become a reference in history that many women that were to come and exist in this country, myself involved, would look at and be inspired, knowing that the ground has already been prepared for all of us as women, as girl children, and small people to see ourselves in the scars of those women who stood up to the erstwhile government and registered their presence without any equivocation. So I do want to strongly speak against the issue that says whenever us ourselves as women rise for a purpose, rise for a cause, there's always this societal frowning of wanting to have us proving ourselves that we are worthy and deserving of standing. And I think it's something that we must not continue. One day in an interview, a journalist asked me, "You are simply an individual. What are you going to do in Parliament?" What is Parliament? Is Parliament not an assembly of individuals? It is. Why are you asking me what am I going to do when I'm an individual? Where do we get the preoccupation of thinking that a woman must sit by the wayside when challenges are happening? And when a woman sees an opportunity to rise and become part of the solution, the first thing that you're going to do, you are going to seek to suggest that you are not deserving of being a leader. This challenge is too mammoth for you. You will not fit it. And I think women of this era must refuse this intentional and deliberate, reducing of the ability and formidable, impeccable aspect that women possess as leaders in society. That at every single turn, our rise is not met with embrace, is rather met with questioning. And that questioning is not one that is genuine about can you articulate something that objectively and substantially can make me to believe in your ability as a leader? No. The question itself is about transferring some message that says, in a very subtle way, I don't believe that you possess any leadership attributes. We must refuse that consistently. We are faced with this, a double questioning of who are we? And I think in the context of South Africa, we've built that foundation. It's well cemented, it's solid. The only thing that is left for us who are women leaders in this generation is to build on it and take forward and ensure that we become rightful solution driving forces for the challenges of this time, which are required that we must rise. The second aspect of your question speaks about the fact that I emerge from a well-documented historical political activism, and that I have seen how women move around in the political discourse, and how do I think that can be changed. I think the most important thing that ourselves as women need to start doing is that in us asserting the leadership that we are, we must not do it in a manner that seeks to compete with any male counterpart, because I do not believe that we should be looking at shortcomings and strengths of women leaders in opposition to their counterparts. We must just look at strengths and weaknesses of women in a holistic way that says we are human beings, that we will not be perfect creatures. We will have areas of strengths, and we will also have areas of weaknesses, which is also available to every other creature that exists. And the most important thing for me is us being mindful of the fact that this phase, which is the phase of watering the seeds of the democracy that were planted by the previous generation, must be our phase of solidifying the environment, that a girl child who comes after me must indeed experience that says, the challenges that we're facing, the generation that I rise after, have been resolved. I face new challenges that I must stand and rise up to and be able to solve them, because they are the challenge of my time, my generation. But it is a travesty that as this generation of women leaders, we're walking in exact same problems and challenges like the ones that Abu Mamuwini were working onto. That tells you how much a woman leader has not been embraced in our society. Lastly, the issue of gender-based violence in South Africa, just like youth unemployment, it's a well-sponsored issue within our society. It is deliberate that society has been made to be a danger spot for women, and women only. And when I'm saying women only, I'm obviously counting the girl child in it as well. But one of the things that I propose in my manifesto is that we can no longer continue saying that justice for victims and survivors of gender-based violence is in court. Courts that are presided over by justice officials and justice officers who are not even themselves fully trained, who do not comprehend what does it mean to deal with an issue of a sexually violated person, a person who is a victim of rape, and a person who is a survivor of rape. I mean, we've got well-documented statistics that speak about the fact that protection orders, they get violated every day in this country, where a woman would have gone to open a protection order, but that protection order will not make the partner or whoever the perpetrator is to stay away. So that on its own, it does speak on the weaknesses that exist in our criminal justice system that require some level of reinforcement, so that we can begin to create a society that not just livable for women and children, but also where men or people who are perpetrators of gender-based violence can be able to see that there is going to be no comfort for them in society. The relevance of me launching my manifesto at the Constitutional Court, at the Constitutional Hill, and specifically at the Women's Jail Center, it was really about tracing the footprints of the giants that has enabled people like myself to be able today to stand here and seize the moment that the opportunity has been created by our democracy, which was not only written by male counterparts and male political activists, but women being very central and very vociferous in fighting and also putting their name and their footprint across. But also it was important for me to do a symbolic reporting back to those leaders to say, whilst the spear might have been left unattended, there is someone who has risen to take that spear, and this generation is a promising generation that we will take from where they fell off and will continue with the journey.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so we'll open it up to the floor now. I know there's a roving mic as well.
We've got about 45 minutes. So
yeah, about 45 minutes. So we'll take floors from the questions. We might still have a few questions that we want to kind of prod and probe. So we've got one gentleman at the back, I think with a Bossa cap. a gentleman in the front with a rise cap. I feel like they are deployees in this room. Can you see what's going on?
Prof. Timber?
Prof. Timber, and then the young woman at the back, and we'll take that round. If you can resist the temptation of a preamble,
A question.
I would appreciate that thing here. Just ask your question so we can get as many voices as possible. So let's start with the gentleman at the back. We have no shame here. We'll stop. We'll cut the mic.
Thank you very much, Prof. My name is Henry Masugu. I hear everyone is talking and they're talking about economic growth and everything, but no one is touching much on the safety, especially in our townships and in rural areas. For you to grow the economy, in fact, let me say this, our economy will not be sustained by the activities that are happening in Sentin or in Rosebank or wheresoever. You actually need to go back to the townships and invest in safety so that the economy can grow. You need to go back to the rural areas, invest in safety so that the economy can grow. Build One South Africa. I read your manifesto, and you speak so much about decentralizing communities. Can you please elaborate a bit further on that? Thank you very much.
If we can refrain from their political party asking their own political party
Honestly.
a question as much as possible. The gentleman at the front.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Dr. Chikane. So my question is to the gentleman from Action as well as Ms. Nobuntu. I'm not sure if I got it. There's a bit of specificity lacking, I think, from the policy proposal around Action's Opportunity Fund. I think what I'm still struggling to get a sense of is how it deals with the structural barriers that inform business funding and lending to SMMEs in particular, because the issue there is the lack of access to to concessional and patient capital. What I don't understand is how your opportunity fund is going to mitigate make access to concessional capital easier while also mitigating the risks that flow from there, especially because we've got DFIs that have very, very similar funding and investment mandates to capital markets and top 5 banking institutions. So that's where the issue where access to capital, at least for me, exists, and I'm not quite sure on how that is mitigated by your opportunity fund. My second question is to Ms. Hlazo-Webster. I think I've always found the voucher, the education voucher, to be a very, very interesting piece of policy, something that initially drew me to BOSA once upon a time. But I think it has a massive risk of drawing capital outside of the public education system, where, if you're going to give people 15,000 Rand or 14,000 Rand to spend wherever they choose to, what's stopping people from spending that money in low-cost private schools or charter schools, which will fundamentally cripple government's abilities to solve the structural issues that exist in our education sector, because that's, these defects are what we need public funding for. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Prof, can we take the young lady at the back first, and then... So our mic person is getting exercise.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kitume Tsipole. We have heard a lot of parties speak about a lot of things, but a few have actually addressed the issue of morality within our country. This question goes to everyone on the panel, by the way. So I just want to understand, what is your party's stance with regard to dealing with the morality issue in our country? For instance, we can't expect the young boy in the township to act right if our leaders at the top at this point are acting immoral. So how are we going to address, or how are you as a party going to address that disconnect between the immoral actions that has funneled down from our top leadership to basically our young people in our townships, in our communities, and how they have been acting in violence and being exposed to certain behavior from our leaders, and now they're acting basically or their actions are consequences of the leadership that we have within our country. How do we address that?
Perfect.
This one here.
And we'll take this last one for this round.
Yeah.
Which hand did you send that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we'll come back this side for the next round.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chairperson. My name is Skungu Chebe. Out of all of you, I heard your rhetoric, but
What?
there's legal that is convincing. You know, maybe we were gonna go with the route of the old parties. You know, the old parties are completely out of rail. They are confused. They failed to implement the policies. You know, now they know the rurals because of the sick votes of those people. Pre-1994, in the rural areas, we had some STZ zones which were full functioning. But up to now, they have disinvested about 30%. Now, that infrastructure now is just white elephant. It's a haven of crime. What happened? Now, of late, we hear them talking about the township economy, which they're clueless about. They just sit do some desktop researches and then call the people into the meetings, and of which they are clueless of what they're talking about. They don't engage people. There's no public engagement into all what they do. We hope that we are not going to follow that. Then we talk of commodity extractives almost on daily basis, decoloniality, and et cetera, et cetera. We do have commodities in the rural villages, but are underutilized. They instead are leaving the shores of the country, whereas people are living in abject poverty. What do we say about it? Yet they come and then talk about we're doing this and this and this, and then what is the progression of a policy that people cannot be allowed to air out their views? Day in, day out, new policies, NDP, ASGESA, and so forth, with all of those policies have failed dismally. And yet now, taking some comradeship, doing this and this with no skills, relevant skills, now are losing billions of rands. People our politicians are being cheated, even including our technocrats, because some do not have competent skills to run the economy. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there is more of a comment, but I think it's a valid comment. Absolutely. Regardless, because it speaks to the state of policymaking. So let's get a round of answers.
Do the response.
Yeah, and then we'll come back for a second round. Who would like to go first?
Should we just
restart that side?
On both and go down.
We can start here. So I know the question wasn't addressed to me, but I do also want to speak to the issue of access to capital. It's something that I am quite passionate about because I've been an entrepreneur for 15 years, more than 15 years, 17 years. And when I started out, I was in my early 20s. One of the biggest issues, and at that point, there was a program called the Umsobomvu Youth Fund. I'm giving away my age here.
Oh, wow.
But there was a program called the Umsobomvu Youth Fund that was then replaced by the NYDA. And, ultimately, I would then, later in the years, one of my businesses is a consulting firm that consults on enterprise development. So I've experienced being an entrepreneur, and then I've been on the other side, developing policy with and for government and for private businesses as well as it pertains to enterprise development. And the issue of access to capital is a serious one. And when you talk about how do you make sure then that there is access, because you can have all the funds, one of the biggest issues has been having policymakers and actually even officials who don't understand the other side, who don't understand what it is to be an entrepreneur or to run a small and medium enterprise. And what you find there is that you have the kinds of hurdles as a small business that you have to jump through that make it impossible. One of the funniest things was I was a young person applying for an NYDA loan and them asking for a payslip. And the reality is, I'm an entrepreneur. Why are you asking me for a payslip? So that kind of thinking and the collateral that they would ask and expect that of entrepreneurs and of young people. So one of the things I know for us as BOSA in our own policy that we've outlined is around the issue of underwriting, making sure that you underwrite loans and you underwrite credit to small businesses. Obviously, the business concept, there has to be proof of business concept, there has to be viability, but you then underwrite a big portion of that credit to make sure that you do give people access, and people who would ordinarily not have access to business credit, that they are able to have it. And that's important, because that's been the gap, that there is no genuine underwriting of credits and therefore no access to credits. And then on the question that was to me on education and on the vouchers and how they could potentially then all be spent in the public education, in the private education system, these are particularly for the public education system and must be spent in the public education system. There is opportunity, and there must be partnerships actually with the private sector where you do have specialized charter schools, and the model then ensures that a set portion of the amount that is allocated must go to the public education system as well. So that's the second. And then on the issue of morality, we have, amongst, in the 4 pillars that we have in our own manifesto and in our jobs plan at BOSA, one of them is about capable states. And part of what we speak to in that is having an ethic ombudsman that monitors the conduct of cabinet ministers. And that is just one of the ways. I mean, there's a couple, and I don't want to rattle on the manifesto here. But I think the point I'm making is that you have to make sure that within the system, there are ways to manage ethics. And maybe I'm not speaking directly to morality, but to making sure that we uphold a certain ethical standard within government itself. And I think that does ultimately then translate to morality. And then there was a gentleman who made a comment, and I get your frustration, sir. I just want to start by saying that I get your frustration. We are 30 years into a government where we all had hopes. We are 30 years into a government where, and I always concede that at the start of our democracy, we did see change. I'm one of those people who are not going to sit here and say nothing has happened. I myself have had some benefits of democracy and of the changes that have happened. So we can never sit and say nothing has changed. That would be unfair. But I can say categorically, over at least the past 15 years, things have changed. And part of it has actually even reversed the gains of perhaps the first 10 or so years that we saw. And so I always understand the frustration of people. I always understand when people say, what is going to be different about you? I'm not excited about what you're saying because it's not different. But what is different that I want to say is that some of us, and I'll speak of myself, have seen what is happening, are not politicians, are not career politicians, have not been in the political system, have served our country the best way we could, have tried through business, through community activism and leadership to do it. But there comes a time when you look at the situation, and there came a time when you looked at the situation, and you said, actually, essentially, nobody's going to come and save us. And so if we must rescue our country, we've got to do it ourselves. And so I sit here as a citizen more than anything, who's put up my hand to say, with what I have, I want to be able to serve my country, and I want to be part of the change. And even as you speak of, for instance, township economy, at BOSA we have a diverse grouping of candidates, 130 of them. And all of them come from different backgrounds. Some of them are in this room. They come from different backgrounds. Some are community activists, some have been in business, some have been in academia, and we all bring different things. I, for one, have worked in and with township economy for a long time. And so this is not from having a business in the township, like I said, to being a consultant and a practitioner. And so it's not to say everybody has that, but it's to say we all have different skills and different experiences that we come in and lend to the project of building South Africa, and in fact to the project of building one South Africa. What I always ask of South Africans is, let's not give up. There are options, there are alternatives, more than there has been in a long time, and it's to look at what you think that is best for you and what you think can change the country.
Thank you so much. I do want to encourage if we can have short answers, just so we get the students asking the questions as well. Otherwise, they'll just read the manifesto and not be able to interrogate you on it. Anela, would you like to respond to some of the questions?
Yeah, I can take two. The one that was about township economy and the morality. I think on the first one, which is the morality aspect, I do want to say that in as much as we may want to say leaders in society, they influence the kind of behavioral pattern that we ultimately adopt as a nation. But we must also recognize the fact that the moral compass of a society is built by a combination of both individual moral values and principles as well as that of the nation itself. So there are some areas that we must not be able to exonerate ourselves in our responsibility as individuals, because if we are talking about the kind of children that we must produce to the society, they are coming from families, and we must reflect on our own ways of bringing up those children, and who are we bringing them to become, and what values do we instill in them, and what principles do we subject them to, because they see who they are to become by the people that are around them, the people that presiding over the process of bringing them up. So I do want to say that as much as we have a rotten public, ethical, and a dilapidated moral compass in South Africa as a result of the politicians that we have allowed to run amok in our country, we must not allow that to be the one rotten aspect that also infiltrates our small, intimate communities where we're supposed to preserve what is our responsibility, at least. Coming to the part, but maybe I must wrap that by saying it is time then that you reflect when you are in the ballot, the kind of leaders that you are electing. Do they pass your own personal moral measure that you want your leaders that must come to public office to hold? On the one part of the township economy, I do want to say, one of the things that when we speak about a stagnant economy of South Africa, we must reflect on is the fact that how we have reached this point of a stagnant economy, it's because we have appreciated small businesses, small black businesses, and we've wanted to sustain them as such. We never want to see them growing and becoming mega conglomerates that ultimately play in the bigger space, because there's a certain ceiling that we would not want it to be infiltrated. We want it to be preserved for a certain groups of big boys that we do not, I won't say big girls, because women problem issues, access issues. So there's a league of big boys that gets left unfiltrated. And at the core of township economy, failures of the fact that we're unable to develop our economy in rural areas and townships is on the basis of the fact that even as we create a path to a government participation by doing business with government from businesses, we only preserve that for big boys. And when the big boys come, we don't even have a way of saying, how do we put a connecting line between the big businesses and the small businesses to ensure that there is that integrated way of ensuring that not just that the skill is transferred, but also there is a programmatic, progressive way of upward pushing of the small businesses, becoming bigger players as well in the industry and contributing to the economy, as that is the intention that we want. When you go to the townships, you will find that a township, for instance, that is in Gauteng, what are the mineral resources that are dominant in Gauteng? It's natural resources, right? But when you go to Eastern Cape, you'll find that the province is rich in agriculture, in tourism, but you will not find rural township economy being concentrated on the very basic industries that would be dominant in such a province, because it is rich in those kind of resources. So those, for me, would be things that we need to review and relook in order to ensure that there's that activation of local economy in townships.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, I keep switching this thing off. Okay, thanks. So I'll try and keep it short. The Rise Mzansi People's Manifesto, Pillar 4, speaks in particular about individual, family, and community well-being, and I'm answering the question here on morality. And I'm echoing some of the sentiments shared by Leader Anela here, is that we have to understand that the final outcome, which is a broken society happens at multiple levels. And so as leaders or policymakers, we need to be able to think about how we create, one, healthy whole individuals. So we talk about, for example, mental health, childcare facilities, and ensuring that a child in their first 1,000 days is fully nourished and fed and their brain is developing accordingly. We talk about family and the impact of our apartheid spatial planning on families. And it was designed that way, and we know that. But we have to be able to accept the fact that families have systematically been broken down over the last 100 years. How do we bring families back together and center family? And when you start making policy that centers family, it forces you to think differently about what is required to create a successful society. So children need to have their parents, which means their parents cannot be leaving at 4 a.m. in the morning to go to work and leaving them with strangers all day, and then coming home after 9 p.m. when the child is already sleeping. At which point do they get the guidance and the input from their parents? So this is why you will find us talking about spatial planning under the banner of family, because these things are interconnected with each other. And then, of course, community. We are raised by our families, but we're also raised by the village, being our communities. And so having healthy communities, thriving communities, communities that give people a sense of self-worth is critical. And that brings me to the topic of townships. Townships were not there to give people a sense of self-worth. They're not there to be economically viable. And I'm talking about, this is very practically, I'm not being emotional here. I'm saying, if you look at the infrastructure that underpins most townships, it is not there it's not built for commercial development. So anybody who wants to have a conversation with you about township economy, but they're not having a conversation about infrastructure as a starting point to that, is having a very hypothetical conversation. Transport, again. If I want to start a business in a township, who's my market? I need to get money from other places coming into my business and my area. So you will look at places like Soweto. A place like Vilakazi Street is successful, and it's growing, and it has grown over the years. Why? Because it is a tourist destination. So it is able to attract new money as a destination to itself. And so this is why even in our Tsuga Gauteng plan, we talk about the need to attract new money, not just circulate the same money that we know is already there, but is not actually resulting in a growth of that economy. And so, so I think these issues that we talk about need to be looked at systematically and actually saying they are all interconnected. We can't have a conversation about education outcomes, again, without, we cry every year about the kids under grade 4 who cannot read for meaning. How must they read for meaning if they don't have books? And if they don't have their parents available to read them bedtime stories every night so that they can bolster their reading? Who's supposed to ensure that our children can read for meaning if we are unavailable to them because 50% of the population are single mothers and many of them have to work and are not available to their children? And so we have to be able to take a systematic approach. And the Rise Mzansi People's Manifesto, bolstered by the various provincial plans, sets about a program of action that is very systematic in nature and looks at how we then unlock all of those interlinkages that produce, in the end, a better leadership, a better society, and better individuals.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Khotso. Politicians and keeping it brief.
It's like 30 seconds.
Yeah. I think to touch on what Siswiso was talking about as well, and I think Nobuntu also alluded to it, is that on the statistic that she had quoted, to play on to that as well, I think about 8% or between 6 and 8% of parents actually read to their kids at night, bedtime stories and stuff like that. And or have that type of time to be able to take away and be able to read to their children at night. So that is something that the underlying factors behind that speaks to spatial planning as well, like some of the panelists have been talking about. So as Action SA, ours is holistically as well, having a look at the type of housing projects that we have, the types of transportation networks and roads that we have that enable that type of forward-looking planning or spatial planning, so that houses are able, or housing developments or projects are able to be centered closer to economic opportunities. So ours, we've seen how, for instance, expropriation of buildings within Johannesburg worked quite well for us, where student accommodation was concerned, and providing municipal workers within the city to be able to find housing, space within the inner city. So we want to replicate something like that as well from a provincial perspective, to bring people closer to centers of economic activity, and to have housing projects that are not in fluffing areas. Like you have a look at Lufereng, for instance, in Soweto, which is by all stretch of our imagination, it should have never been something conceptualized, let alone implemented. So you have to catch 2 taxis for you to be able to get to your place of work in Sandton, and then another 2 taxis to get back at home. So how are you able to do that when the transportation network that you have around your community does not speak to you being afforded that type of opportunity to be able to get to work quicker and to home, back to home quicker? So that is something that we are also looking into, but also broadly as well, as part of our law enforcement strategy to speak to issues of morality as well, and to tackle issues like gangsterism. We think that currently you have a very police-heavy type of approach in dealing with matters like that. But you also need to think about a social development perspective into it. What type of programs, learning and cultural programs do we have in our communities to empower communities to have a different approach or a different attitude towards matters like gangsterism and drug and substance abuse, which also filter into matters of morality around our communities. So you don't see any of things like that. That's why your Westbury is burning because of issues like gangsterism. Your El Dorado parks are burning. Western Cape, some of pockets within Cape Town as well, are burning because of these issues. Children will grow up because parents are not around, and you think gangsterism is cool. I need to join a gang for me to be able to have street credit, or whatever it is that we call it, for me to be reputable within my community, for me to be a somebody within my community. So we need to start thinking around things like that. What type of supplementary programs are we introducing up and above the obviously needed, rejigging of our law enforcement and policing, programs that we all want to implement in communities. So we do believe in a social development approach to it. We think it has to be informed and sort of married into a law enforcement strategy. So you can't have a Minister of Police or MEC for Community Safety not doing anything that does not complement what an MEC for Social Development or a Minister for Social Development is also doing. So that is some of the things that we are proposing around that. But
so if we can hold it there, because you've got 15 minutes, and I want to see if we can squeeze in 2 rounds of questions.
Can I answer some of the Opportunity Fund question that came from?
If you can answer in the next round,
that's
perfect.
And if we start on this side, Khotso, and then move
We
that
left
way.
Prof. Temba.
I think he abdicated. We've got the gentleman at the back, and then the gentleman in the yellow shirt.
Is a young woman right
And
there?
then right here, so I didn't see it.
And on this side.
And then in the front here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Go ahead, and if you introduce yourself as well.
Thanks, Doc. My name is Matlala Seitlalogile. I think my question is very simple. It focuses more on foreign policy, international relations, right? Because I had Nobuntu, Vuyiswa, and Lungelo touched on issues such as the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and OAU Agenda 2063. It's multi-layered, but it focuses on that. Firstly, given South Africa's current foreign policy, I mean, the number of pillars that is anchored in your human rights, social social justice, all of these things, advancing African interests in whatever we do throughout the world as a country. What exactly is it that any of the parties would change about the current foreign policy? The second aspect, especially relating to Novuntu and Vuyiswa's inputs around the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Novuntu spoke about the slow implementation of the agreement itself. Vuyiswa, I think, touched on not seeing any, products from across the continents on our shelves as yet. Given the realities that a number of steps has to be taken to implement the trade agreement itself, I mean, your rules of origin, your non-tariff barriers issues, you mentioned something about infrastructure for the township economy. Sometimes I think we forget that South Africa is one of the most resourced in terms of infrastructure in the continent. I mean, we have the longest rail network, we have the longest road network in the continent. Those are necessities to actually operationalize the AFTA. Taking those into account, how different would you have approached the issue of operationalizing the agreement speedily? And also just last input on the issue.
Matlala, I'm going to stop you there. Matlala is also one of our lecturers here, so I can see he's very passionate.
Good day. My name is Morena. I live in Bertram's. My question just simply comes from very social aspects of life, and then it breeds on to a very, very wider range. Based on, in terms of, based on I speak very, very vividly from the youth side, based on the, leadership filtering down to schools, because if you can check everything that's being done now, our school systems doesn't allow us to be to impart or maybe take full responsibility and also being part of the leadership in our communities or wherever. So because as I can check it out, skills is something that you can acquire through knowledge. So our school systems doesn't teach us to be leaders. The school system doesn't teach us the way of making money. So in that regard, can I just get a very, just a clerical, succinct answer on that?
Can you direct the question to one person in particular?
Basically to Ms. Ramokgopa.
So the question is about schools do not do enough leadership training within the schools, and the deficit of that and the impacts of it, if I'm summarizing correctly.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Economic skills, yeah.
Yes. And then we have the hand in the front.
Thank you to the panelists and thank you for the opportunity. So my question is regarding the porous nature of our borders, right? And when we talk about porous borders, everybody thinks Beitbridge, but OR Tambo is also porous, and so is Cape Town International. That is why some unfavorables from the Eastern European region have found refuge in South Africa, right? And, part of the reasons why we were grey-listed as a country is because of that. And another reason is the illicit flows of funds in and out of the country, right? So from so there's the policy and then there's the administration. What are the different parties' interventions or propositions with regards to firstly managing our borders apart from the infrastructure? Because you can build high walls, but if you have administrators who are going to find means to circumvent the laws of the country, we're always going to find ourselves back to point one. So what are the interventions that the parties are planning to put in place in order to manage the nature of the porous borders that we have?
Yeah, and can you also direct the question to a particular party?
I think the president of Action SA was very passionate about managing immigration. So to you, Mr. Zulu, and if Mr. Ramokgopa could also respond. Thank you.
Perfect. And then we have the final hand over there.
Thank you. Awe Kawe, social, racial and gender justice activist. I think I had two questions, but I'll ask one because of time. I wanted to understand what each political party and independent candidate's plan for mental health crisis is in South Africa, given the current state of our healthcare system that is failing us, and in general not taking consideration that mental health is a healthcare crisis, and what the solution is, a tangible solutions. I'm genuinely not interested in innuendos or what they think or whatever. What is the solution for the mental health crisis in South Africa? Thank you.
Jem, if you do have a second question, if it's burning, and you can direct it to one person, because it will probably be our last round.
Okay, I think I will direct this question to the independent candidate. I think Ms. Ramokgopa and Bossa have enough questions. South Africa is a very ableist country. Many things such as the job market, public transport does not service people living with disabilities. It's very inaccessible. And I think that they are a neglected, marginalized community. What is your inclusivity strategy, and how does intersectionality factor in your strategy dealing with the issues faced by people living with disabilities, and making South Africa more inclusive for people living with disabilities? That is including disabilities we may not see physically, because that's, again, an ableist principle and position of looking at things, people with autism, ADHD, etc. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if we can also, as you're responding, also just wrap up as your final point too, and then we can wrap up completely. Thank you.
Your opportunity to get votes in the room. If we can start with Mr. Zulu, and then we'll end with Nobuntu. It's almost as if you guys don't want to talk to them, the way you switch off the mics.
Yeah. Thanks, Khotso. I think to first start with, to me, from Rise Mzansi, I think, the question on the Opportunity Fund, I always like to think of it in this way, in that access to credit is not the only issue, or that is going to be sort of like the panacea to, resolving all the issues where small businesses are concerned. I think there's a lot of things that are happening there that we sort of never unpack fully beyond just saying that they need 100,000 rand or 500,000 rand, and you name it. So there's a technical aspect of it. I think I'm going to put my management consultant hat here, is that you don't have the types of skills that a person is able to display in terms of taking a business from 0 to 50, and then from 50 to 100. So how do I then make sure that, let's take for instance, if you are within the agricultural space, how are you able to take consignment from where it is being produced, where it's being demanded the most? There's a specific skill set that is also needed as an entrepreneur for you to be able to, to do all of those things. But beyond that, we think that, like Snobunde had also alluded to as well, is that you need massive underwriting of some of this credit that government is able to disperse to small businesses. And our value proposition is to say, how do we lessen all of these barriers that people are seemingly having to jump through in being able to access that credit? We saw during COVID the loan guarantee scheme, which was a joke. Quite a large-scale amount of businesses couldn't really tap into that fund and be able to assist it, to be able to be a going concern during difficult times, and to be able to be forward-looking post-COVID as well, and continue operating as businesses. So we are saying that let's lessen some of those barriers to entry to the market and to be able to access credit, but let's look at it holistically as well. This is where the Opportunity Fund then comes in to say, beyond just us giving you the credit facility that you are going to be needing, What types of technical skills can we be able to assist you with as well, equip you with, in being able to take your business from 50, because you've started now, from being able to take it from 50 to 100. And that takes a different kind of conversation as well, that we think, should we be able to get things going our way and be able to capacitate the Opportunity Fund with the right kind of technical and technocratic skills, they will be able to assist people from that perspective. But currently, things are working in silos. You have small business development doing its own thing. You've got DTIC doing its own thing, the NEF doing its own thing, and other DFIs doing their own things. So yeah, that's our value proposition from there, is to say, let's take the 60 billion rands that we are aiming to be able to raise in a financial year, allocate 30% of that to SMMEs, and then go further and give them the technical expertise that will be able to assist them to go forward. Yeah.
And then you had the question that was directed to you about open borders.
Yes, on the question on open, sorry.
Yeah.
I think I came in there before you were done. Ours has been a very consistent, position where this is concerned, and we've been called so many names: xenophobic, yeah, Afrophobic, you name it. But it's to say there is a very real danger that we have in the country of porous borders, because we are not able at any given moment to tell who's in the country, for what purpose are they in the country, how long are they in the country, should they have been permitted to be in the country and stuff. So the reason you have a case like that in the Western Cape, where you have all of these organized crime mafia heads from Eastern Europe, I don't want to stereotype, beyond that, but because it's out there in the public, I can talk about it. You have all of these organized crime heads going there because some of our mechanisms internally as a country are not able to detect whether somebody has been issued a red notice from Interpol or not. And then as a result, you're able to come here, you buy property, you're assimilating into our communities, and then you establish the very same organized crime syndicates that you were running away from in your respective host countries into South Africa. And then now we have to deal or contend with that as well, allocate more policing resources to come and deal with the situation. It's an untenable scenario. So what we are saying is that to man our borders, we need to have effective collaboration between all law enforcement across the board, from your South African Revenue Service, your South African National Defence Force, police, your BMAs, you name it. All hands have to be on deck, and they have to modernize as well. So it's no use just saying we're going to employ 10,000 additional BMA officers or Border Management Authority officers, and then you give them bakkies and you say, drive around our borders and have a look at who's crossing illegally or not. In part, that speaks to the manning of the borders physically. But what about the administrative portion of it? Why is it that we are also not making it easier for people to be able to gain the type of certification they need to be able to enter the country? That speaks to the inefficiencies within Home Affairs. Why are people resorting to crossing our borders illegally? Speaks to the ineffectiveness of Home Affairs. So what we are saying is that our reassuring message as Action SA is not to say that people shouldn't come to South Africa. That's far what we are proposing. We are welcoming to everybody across the world. Say, come to our country, but provided you do so legally. We have identified as well that there are certain skills we will not be able to produce as South Africa, so we will be forced to tap into the skills pool of the world and attract that skill set into the country to be able to grow our economy. That's within our economic interest as well. So we can't be working against that.
So
but what we're saying is that
if you wrap up in like 10 seconds, so we can give the others a chance.
But to wrap up is to say that let's resolve the inefficiencies of Home Affairs, the administrative inefficiencies, not only for foreign nationals, for locals as well within the country, residents. And let's have a look at what we are doing in manning our borders by land, sea, or port, or whatever it is. But let's have a look at those strategies around that. What type of coordination from law enforcement? And let's relook into those strategies. Thank you.
So our boss is telling us that our time is running out. But I do want to give you guys the opportunity. But if we can keep it, I know you guys also got a lot of questions. but to like a minute each,
That's
which is a lot, but it's effective communication skills. If you want to learn more about that, come to the Wits School of Governance. We teach it all the time. But anyway.
Love that.
I'm going to try, and I apologize for not doing some of these answers justice, but I am available afterwards to discuss in full if you prefer that. So, okay, let me start with Matlala. In short, I think what needs to be done better in terms of foreign policy is consistency. We need to walk that which we talk. If we say we are about human rights, let's be consistent about being about human rights, no matter whose human rights we're talking about. If we're talking about national interest, let's then discuss what is our national interest and which relationships serve our national interests. If we say we are non-aligned, let's then practice being non-aligned and not being aligned sometimes and then non-aligned at other times. So I think there is an inconsistency and incoherence, therefore, in our foreign policy that I think, again, is a political problem, not so much a design problem. Coming into the operationalization of the AFTA, again, I think that, as the word suggests, it's very much an operational thing. So to give you an example with Zambia, my husband does a lot of trade on the continent and gives me a lot of information about the experience of trading in Zambia. When the president of Zambia calls an investment conference and invites other players from around the continent to come and invest, competent ministers sit in the room, DGs sit in the room, implementers sit in the room. And before anybody leaves, contracts are signed, work can happen, and there is follow-up to that work. And so we have dropped the ball on even the low-hanging fruits. Before we get into building new railroads and shipping things everywhere, the ability to just execute and ensure that there's ease of doing business and that the people who are tasked with implementing, that are sitting on the other side of the table, are actually of the mind that they want to urgently implement. And this is what we see actually driving the growth in the rest of the continent, is that it's just easier now to do business there than it is in South Africa, because in South Africa we have all kinds of political challenges and government challenges that people have to navigate. On this question of education, I think it has been said in the room already, but I do think that there needs to be a serious reprioritization of technical education. And we speak to this extensively in our manifesto. And technical education cuts across, and it's really, in my mind, talking about trade schools in particular. Those who were there before the 80s and such, I'm looking at yourself, Prof. Maseko, you would have known that, there was a dominance and a prominence of trade schools, be it in the agricultural sector, the nursing sector, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, even if you are someone who is in the arts in South Africa, I only know one art school in Johannesburg, National School of the Arts. I don't know any other art school, and yet we are some of the biggest creators and exporters of the creative sector. Why are we not creating special colleges for this and special institutions that are able to deal with that at a secondary school level before you even get to tertiary?
Just 10 seconds.
All right, cool. And then the illicit financial flows thing, in my mind, it's a man-made crisis. We have a corrupt government that benefits from poor implementation of immigration and poor implementation of financial governance. They want to push money in and out of the country. We have a president who has millions sitting under his couch, refusing to account for how that money got in, where was it counted, where was it registered. They are the prime beneficiaries of illicit financial flows and therefore have no political will to actually do anything about it. And so we must deal with the corruption of the government and get them out. And then, yeah, I think actually that might have been the last one. I'm sorry if I missed anyone.
It was the education one, but I'm sure you'll talk to the gentleman after the event.
I answered that on the trade schools.
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
okay. So if there's any other questions, very happy to offline after. Thank you.
All right, I'll zoom straight to the question that was directed to me so that to save time. My strategy to deal with the challenges that are faced by people living with disabilities focuses on 3 areas, which is 1, access to opportunities, 2, advocacy for recognition, as well as fighting discrimination of people living with disabilities. This is seen through them not being included in almost all sectors of our society. I mean, we are sitting today in a very iconic institution of our country, WIRTS, which is historical in its nature and carries so much credentials in the body of who South Africa is. But if I were to say, let's walk out to the campus of WIRTS and check if there is a specially demarcated side that ensures access to people living with disabilities, it will be proven that, as it is with the entire country, we do not have such. And these are some of the glaring challenges that we need to speak into, because it cannot be that 30 years down the line we still have such a critical sector that is pushed to the margins and is not recognized. But lastly, I'm saying that I'm standing as an independent candidate here in Gauteng to go and serve South Africa in the National Assembly. I believe that the people of South Africa have seen what the 30 years of democracy has done, what political parties are capable of doing, and I'm saying there's no middle line. You either choose your country or you choose the status quo. I do not stand for the status quo. I stand for the change.
Okay, I'll answer my two questions and then do my parting shots. What would you change about foreign policy? I agree with Vui about consistency as a first. The second is to play a more influential role in Africa. I think that as South Africa, we are well positioned economically and in other ways in order to be able to drive regional integration on the continent as a start, but also even to mediate in conflicts. We've seen ourselves getting involved in conflicts in the Middle East, and we need to be able to use that negotiation prowess and that diplomacy to actually play a better role in Africa. And then the second question was around operationalizing the Africa Free Trade Agreement. And I mean, there's a number of things, but I'll speak to one because I saw it work in some kind of way. And that is to ensuring that we improve bilateral agreements and bilateral relationships. So you can start with a cohort of particular countries that you work with in that instance. There was something called the East 3 route, which was Swaziland, South Africa, and Mozambique. And that was one example of doing it. And so you don't have to try and win on the whole continent all at once. It's to be able to engage and to be able to have harmonization within a particular route to start with, and have those regulations that you harmonize and have routes that you actually all invest in the infrastructure for as countries. And I think that's how you start to operationalize. And as a parting shot, I would say 2019 had the lowest voter turnout. And to me, that says that the parties that existed and that presented who they were and what they have and what they've done to South Africans in 2019, South Africans were not happy with. We sit here as new parties because South Africans were not happy with what existed in 2019. And what I'd like to say from Bosa is to say we have new leaders, we have fresh leaders, we have fresh thinking, and we also have a pragmatic approach to policy and a pragmatic way and a pragmatic approach to solving the issues that we see in education, in economy, and safety. And I'm inviting you to say, I was asked, let's ask people to vote for us. Vote for us for that reason. You were not satisfied with what was there in 2019. We're here, we're different, we're here to bring change.
Thank you so much. We give them all a round of applause.
I also want to say thank you to our panelists for engaging so transparently and also in such a diplomatic way, which I think also speaks to the potential for our political environment going forward. So thank you, everyone, and to our audience for joining us and for your thoughtful questions, too.
Yeah, no, thanks so much, everyone, and all drive home safely.
Thank you so much.